We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Welcome, Beth, so much to the podcast. It's so nice to see you again, and I'm really looking forward to what we have to talk about today.
Yes, me too. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about you just real quick, and then I'll let you finish.
This is my least favorite part.
I know. It's so awkward, right? Go ahead and talk about me. I'd rather have you talk about me than me. I agree. So you're a trauma therapist, but you're no longer in private practice, but that's your specialty, is you're a trauma therapist. And that's what actually drew me to you, because I went looking for therapists who specialize in trauma that can give great tools and tips to help people. And I really liked your area. And I'm going to read what, what you wrote about yourself, or what someone wrote about you on your website. And I really love this. And it says, I'm a healer, I'm a helper, a mother, a flawed human being who shares in the joys, fears, and sadnesses that we all experience. My personal and professional journey, shaped by encounters with trauma and loss, has transformed into a mission to educate others on supporting children in navigating adversity. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And I know that's definitely your specialty, is helping parents, supporting children through navigating in the adversities that they deal with. And that's, that goes right along with, helping parents manage it so that we hopefully eliminate the abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even myself, like I need help with parenting
I know.
my daughter. And, I go to therapy and I read all the articles and stuff in the books and stuff for my own self so that I can be the best parent that I can. And I still fall down and fail at it on a regular basis. So it's just so hard. And I just really I do know that when you do have the education, you do have the skills and strategies, when you understand the neurobiology of trauma and how it impacts a child's life and their body and their brain, that significant positive changes can take place. And that's the hopeful part for me, is that once people have this information and the tools and the skills, it really is life-changing for both the adult and the child. So
yeah, because I can tell you, as a childhood abuse survivor, and thinking back as a child and where I was at and not knowing what to do, and having parents who didn't know what to do. I don't even know if they were really aware of the abuse that was fully going on and what they were contributing. But you're right. Knowledge is power. And for those parents out there and we all struggled. Every parent has struggled being a parent. It's, you've got the emotional component. It's different when you're able to help someone else with their children as opposed to your own, because there's that, emotions and feelings and the attachments, and you're kind of blinded a little bit by it. But having the knowledge and the tools to be at your disposal, so that when a situation comes up and you can take that minute and go, wait a minute, and just take a break and remember that tool that can help you in that moment. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. And yeah, that's true. Sometimes we're too close to it as parents. We need that outside support and guidance. And like for myself, like my daughter, she won't take a lot of direction or like skills and strategies for managing her mental health, like for her anxiety or different things. And it's like, but she'll listen to someone else, right?
Yes.
So there's power in that, and that when you have guidance, when you have someone from the outside, who doesn't have that tight, close relationship, then the child can sometimes be more willing to learn from that person, which is a beautiful thing.
So tell us how you got into trauma therapy. How did you do that?
Yeah. So, well, it's a long story. I usually start with that. I kind of found it um, just but not by mistake, but I wasn't planning to end up being a trauma therapist. I went back to school after my mom passed away suddenly when I was in my 20s. I decided that life was too short to keep doing something as a career that I just didn't find meaningful or purposeful to me. I was working in corporate America, working for different large companies in the city, and I just hated it every day. I was like, oh, why am I doing this? So when she passed away, it was traumatic for me and a huge loss that I still struggle with at times. And I decided I really need to do something that means more to my life, and that when I look back, I don't regret having spent all this time in a career that I didn't really care about or enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So through some self exploration, I realized that, I really wanted to become a therapist and a counselor. So I worked full time, went to school at night to get my master's degree, graduated, and was looking for, a job. And as a new graduate, you're kind of just taking whatever you can get, right?
Yeah.
At
Yes.
least then wasn't quite as easy as it is now. It was more stigmatized still back then. And this was back in 2013. And so I came across from a friend referred me for a position working with children in foster care, kinship care, and adoption. So children who have experienced trauma, neglect, abuse, loss, separation from birth families, just tremendous, tremendous pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
With our
I could
broken
really,
foster system, right?
oh, such a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And I might have you back.
Yeah, it is severely, severely broken.
Mm-hmm.
It's just devastating once you pull that curtain back and you see what's going on in our child welfare system. It's terrible. There's change happening slowly, but it's not enough for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I kind of was thrown into that world, not expecting to be, but got the position and loved the idea of working with children and trauma, and felt that I could really relate because of the loss that I had experienced in my 20s by losing my mom suddenly. Although I wasn't a child anymore, it still could empathize and deeply connect with children who were experiencing loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that was really the root of the trauma, right? So there might have been abuse, there might have been neglect, and those are awful and terrible things, but I feel like we tend to not address the loss as some of the foundational pieces of childhood trauma. And when I could do that work and help the children grieve and really address their losses, their loss of safety, their loss of compassion and care, their
The
loss
loss of their
of
parents, right?
their parents, yeah,
Their
their biological
siblings,
home,
maybe.
their siblings. And then once we would work on addressing some of the loss and the grief, then we could get to the other pieces. But that to me was where I found the most progress, was working with the loss first. And then, and also educating the parents, like the caregivers, the foster parents, the grandparents, so many grandparents raising their grandchildren in our country who are invisible in our communities, but are struggling so much. Found a really big heart for them. A big part of my work is for grandparents raising their grandchildren, which inspired me to write a children's book for those families. And I saw that when the parents gained the skills and the tools and understood trauma, and not only understood it, but knew what to do in a moment of a child in an active trauma response, and things that they could do to prevent additional re-traumatization, we were able to make a lot of progress. And so to me, the work is very hopeful. Like some people will say, how do you do this work? How do you sit with all that pain? And to me, it's because there's hope there. There's hope for change, hope for healing.
And you step in and you're able to help these people. And, because I thought about being a foster parent for a minute and then realized way in over my head. They really are special, because that's, I can't imagine bringing in this child who's been in a traumatic situation. You don't know this child doesn't know you. They're fearful, and they come into this situation, and you've got to try to manage that. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it is intense. And I think about it all the time myself. Once a week at least, I'm like, oh, should I do it? But it's just, it is a challenge. And honestly, the people that are able to do it are angels, in my opinion. I met so many wonderful foster parents. I think there's also a stigma around foster parents that, they're these bad people that just want to hurt kids or just want the money. And I didn't see that in my work.
Oh,
It
that's
wasn't about
refreshing.
money.
That's
Yeah, it wasn't
refreshing.
about money. They were busting their butts to take care of these kids. And the tiny amount of stipend they get is just covers their food and clothing,
Barely,
essentially.
probably.
Maybe even food, but probably not even food, but maybe clothing. So, I just saw tremendous love in those families and commitment, to trying to help a child, but just not knowing what to do. They're just overwhelmed. So yeah, I really tip my hat to foster parents, kinship parents, adoptive parents. It's an uphill battle, but one that's well worth it. And yeah, amazing things can happen. Our brains can change all the way up until our 80s. Our brains are plastic, and they can mold and change. And especially children, they have the most neuroplasticity. And so the earlier we intervene with these trauma-informed care practices, the more hope there is for healing.
So would you go into the home? I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, and prevention, like we can prevent some things from happening if we intervene early enough.
And so would you go into the homes and sit with the parents, and how would you manage that? How would you help them? Where do you start?
Yeah, I would say, I was fresh out of grad school. I didn't have a child at that time, so I wasn't even a parent. And luckily, I had incredible supervision at my organization, and lots of great training and professional development, continuing education that, kind of bolstered on along throughout the process. But so I honestly, for me, it was just, I was there to listen. That was always my thing was, this work was honestly like not wanted a lot of times. Like the families didn't really want me there, but they were being forced to have me there because the social worker implemented it, and they didn't have a choice. And so I really had to build trust. It was really a exercise and practice and building trust with people. And the way I did that was by not being the expert on their family, letting them be the expert on their family, and letting them tell me, what they needed to share, instead of me coming in saying, oh, do this, do that, do this, do that. It was more relationship building and trust building. And some children wouldn't meet with me. I had, teens that literally would get on their bike and take off when they saw my car pull up outside. It was there.
Were they afraid? Were they afraid like you were gonna?
Maybe, but I think, maybe there was a fear that I was a social worker coming to take them and move them somewhere else. I mean, these kids have been moved and bounced from home to home to home. They're used to people like me showing up and taking them somewhere else to a new home.
So they just get re-traumatized over and over and over.
Yes. And the reason that happens, the reason why children leave their foster homes, or when foster parents decide they can't handle it anymore, it's because of the trauma behaviors. It's the trauma responses. And they come out as really difficult, challenging behaviors. And the caregivers just don't know what to do. And so they ask to have the child removed. And then that creates another trauma, which sends them to the next foster home with that rejection and that abandonment.
And it just builds up.
And then so they're like, I'm not getting attached to this person. They're just going to ask me to leave too. So I'm going to do everything I can to get kicked out of here as fast as I can. I'm not going to get close to anybody. I'm not going to I'm not going to behave. I'm just going to act out and see how quickly I can get bounced to the next place. So it's really a self-perpetuating cycle that begins once children enter foster care. If they don't have caregivers who know how to handle these behaviors, the child just keeps getting re-traumatized because the parents ask, or the caregivers have them removed.
Yeah,
And
that's
sent to
another rejection, another abandonment.
Exactly. Yeah. So some
Mm-hmm.
of them were fearful when I pulled up. Some of them were over it. Like they've had 17 therapists, and they'd be damned if I'm going to come in and try and cozy up to them and be their friend, because they've already been left by X number of therapists and they're over it. So that's another issue, especially for teens. And then others are just, just fearful. I think just, it's really about fear of abandonment, rejection, and putting up that tough wall of like, you're not going to get close to me. I've already been hurt too many times. So trust building is
Mm-hmm.
where the majority of my work, not only with the children, but with the parents.
Mm-hmm.
So for the ones that wouldn't sit down with me, wouldn't even see me, I would just come and meet with the parents every week and just keep showing up and keep showing up. And I would meet with one parent at first and maybe not get the other one in the room because they didn't want anything to do with it. But then they kept seeing me show up, and I sit at the kitchen table with them, and I listen and reflect back to them their struggles and let them have a process and the treatment of the situation, and help them have autonomy and choices, and really just allowing them to have some control and power, so they don't feel like I'm, some expert coming in to tell them what to do with their kids,
Yeah.
You really, you just have to be really open to listening and hearing people out. And the truth is, these foster parents a lot of times are so overwhelmed that they just
Yeah.
need somebody to vent to that they were
Yeah.
happy to spend the hour with me once I was there,
Yeah.
they, because then they just start rambling off all the things that were going on, and that would let some of the steam out of the boiling pot of water. That analogy, if you're holding in all of this tension and anger, resentment, whatever, fear, whatever it is, and you're holding it in and you don't have anywhere to let it out a little bit, eventually the lid on that pot is just going to flip right off, right?
Yeah.
And that's usually what would happen with these families. So when the foster parents or kinship parents had a chance to share some of what was going on and release some of that tension with me, then that would trickle down to how they were behaving towards the children and what they
Mm-hmm.
were able to tolerate from the children. That whole idea of like frustration tolerance, where if we, you can have, if you're feeling supported and loved and guided, you're going to have a lot more tolerance for frustration
Yes.
than if you are stretched too thin, have nobody to talk to, don't feel
Mm-hmm.
cared about. So when the parents started to feel supported by me, their trust grew, but also their ability to tolerate frustration would
Mm-hmm.
grow.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
And you would obviously give them guidance on how to handle stuff, right? On how to manage the
Yeah.
situations. So why don't you give us some examples? Because in case we've got foster parents out there or people who are considering it, or, just to help us understand that whole dynamic, and give us some examples of probably the biggest problems that some of the children had or the parents have had, and how you guided them through working through that, I guess, how you supported
Yeah.
them in that.
Yeah. So, where do I start? There's so many goodies.
We got time.
And really, my area of specialty is trauma and foster care and child welfare situations. However, this stuff translates to any parenting relationship.
Correct.
It's really the same thing I would tell a foster parent is the same thing I would tell
Mm-hmm.
a parent from a traditional family. I wouldn't suggest anything different. If you have a child who has big explosive emotions or who is shut down and fearful all the time, these are the skills I would use, whether it was a foster care situation, a divorced family, or
Mm-hmm.
some other type of trauma and loss, maybe the loss of a parent, the death of a loved one,
Mhm.
so what I would do, like I said, I normally would start with the parents. Obviously, I would meet with the child and try to start building relationship with them, build trust through different games and art activities of, to just get to know each other.
Mhm.
Part of that was like being vulnerable myself a little bit with the child and
Yeah.
letting them know, like, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes, and taking risks alongside of them. One really great intervention when you're starting out with somebody, was to it was actually, I think it was Winnicott, one of the pioneer child therapists, recommended or came up with this game, this silly drawing game. And what you do is, it's two people, there's, A and B, or whatever, one and two, and one person draws a scribble and then hands it to the other person, and the other person has to make the scribble into something, right?
Ooh.
Like make it into like some shape or something recognizable. And then the other person does it. They do a scribble and then they hand it back to the other person. And this back and forth, this sort of serve and return experience builds attachment and trust and safety. And it shows that, I was vulnerable enough to, make a scribble and not be perfect.
Mhm.
And I trusted that you would, take that scribble and turn it into something. So there's all these very subtle things that are happening in a process like that. And that's something that parents can do with their children too, to build connection, to build attachment.
I
It
was
really
thinking of doing
depends on
that
the
with my
age.
grandchildren. Seriously,
Yeah,
I love that
it's
idea. I'm going to make a note of
yeah,
that.
it's just a fun activity.
Yeah.
So, things like that. It sounds simple, but there's a lot happening in there,
Mhm.
that we sometimes just take for granted. And so there were activities similar to that where it's like a serve and return. We might play like a game with like questions, and questions at first start off really easy, like what's your favorite color, what's your, this, that, just general questions. And then as you're playing the game, they get a little bit harder, a little bit more personal. And I would answer the questions, right along with them, and age appropriate, and with
Sure.
keeping professional boundaries and everything.
Right.
But I would I'd share a little bit about my life, because you have to know who you're talking to feel trust
And
with that
connect,
person
right?
and connect. Yeah.
Mhm.
So with the children, that's how it was. It was slow. It was through having fun together,
Mhm.
increasing moments of joy and positive interactions. And that was really the goal for me with the parent and the child. Is my goal was always, how do we improve positive interactions in your family? Because the more time you spend in joy and positivity, the less time you have to spend fighting and then,
Mhm.
adversity. So I would really work with the parents to, I'd take them through a curriculum actually that I helped develop at the time, with the organization I was working with, a trauma-informed parenting curriculum. And that was part of each meeting. I want to say the first 8 to 10 sessions, we would take them through a piece of the parenting curriculum. So I might spend the first half of the session with the family, and then, the second half of the session, the child would leave the room and I would do parenting curriculum with them. My sessions could be anywhere from an hour to 3 hours.
Yeah.
So this wasn't your traditional, you come for 45 minutes and you're
Yeah.
gone. Like I didn't actually have to leave at any specific time. Like I had to stay until it was safe for me to go, kind of situation. So sometimes I would be there for 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on what was going on. Um,
Wow.
and uh, and so that wasn't frequent, but typically my sessions would go to like 2 hours. That
Mhm.
would be no big surprise to have a 2 hour session. So I could fit a lot
Mhm.
in those sessions, between splitting it up, time with the child, time with the adult, and then at times time together. So yeah, so once the parents would have a more clear perspective on why the behaviors were happening, and
Mhm.
understanding trauma and what it elicits in children and how it changes their brain, and it sets them up to fear their safety and feel threatened all the time, and how we need to help build that trust. And so not only was it my job to build trust with the family, but it was my job to teach the adults how to build trust with the child, and vice versa, the child to build trust with the adults. So, so lots of information and education around how to do that. A lot of it all about connecting, right? And being present, being available. One of my best suggestions was always to spend 10 minutes a day, just 10 minutes a day, commit to 10 minutes a day of do nothing time, I would call it. And what that means is that you would sit down on the floor or sit next to the child or whatever in their favorite thing that they like to do, where they're like calm and enjoying themselves, whether it's drawing, games, building things, maybe it's jumping on the trampoline, whatever it might be that the child enjoys. And the parent or caregiver's job, their only role is to just be 100% present for those 10 minutes. No distractions, no looking at your phone, putting all of your attention on them, watching them, whatever they're doing, just observing and witnessing them for 10 full minutes a day, not interrupting with rules or directions, not trying to guide what they're doing or give them feedback, but just watching, unless of course there's a safety issue.
Right.
Then you'd have to
connect with them.
But right, to just give, because the greatest gift we can give children is our full presence. And that so rarely happens because we're so fragmented these days because of our phones interrupting us all the time and our email dinging and it's just, there's just so much stimulation and so much going on. And then sometimes we just get stuck in our own thoughts and our own worries, and the child we could literally be looking at the kid going, and we're not there, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and not
we're
taking
not
in
even
anything.
hearing what they're saying.
Yeah.
You can sense that. Children
can.
are sponges. They can sense when we're not there. Even myself, I do it. Like last night, I was sitting, I quickly was trying to respond to a work email on my phone. My daughter was standing there asking me a question. She asked it 3 times before I actually heard her, and I'm like, God, that must really suck. Like I felt really crappy. And I was like, actually, that happens way more than I realize.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even hear her until like the 3rd time.
I know.
Because I was
I've caught myself doing that.
So
Even
really,
in my husband, he'll ask, and I'm like, oh, I was sitting here looking at something on my phone, and I set it down and I give my attention to him.
Yeah. You can't even hear, you like block it out when you're looking at your phone. You don't even hear or see the person. It's wild. So now when children are experiencing that feels like rejection to them. That feels abandoning to them. That feels like they don't matter, that they're invisible.
The thing that we need to remember as adults is, children don't have the capacity that we do. And when they see something and it doesn't feel good to them, they make up a story that works for them. And that story could be so wild, but it works for them at the moment. And then they carry that up.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's so much of the issue that we see in the difference of what parents understand and why and what children are doing. They can often make up lots of fantastical associations, right? They make associations between things that really are not associated. And that can be scary for them. It's almost like magical thinking. It's like, well, I raised my elbow and mom yelled at me, so I better not raise my elbow anymore. Like, or, I put it down and she stopped yelling. So, and I know that's an extreme example, but
I remember doing that. I remember doing that. I remember doing that as a kid, is getting a system together that will keep me, what I think is keeping me safe. Yeah. Because it worked all these times. And so that works for me. I can remember, that's not crazy. I can remember thinking that.
Yep. And it's a safety system. That's exactly what it is. And that's why you see a lot of oppositional defiant behavior in children with trauma, is because they've come up with all of these associations that aren't true, but feel true to them.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so feel very true and are very much tied to their sense of safety and security.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them, having control and power is everything for them, for that's their safety. And
Right.
so they will
Right.
control the environment in whatever way feels safe to them. And defiance is always about fear. It's always based
Mm-hmm.
in fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of harm, fear of loss, fear of abandonment, rejection. So part of that is getting caregivers to understand that, where a lot of us just tend to think, oh, my kid's being a bad kid, or my kid is
Mm-hmm.
troubled, or my kid hates me or doesn't like me, or we come up with all these stories too, right? Because we don't know what's going on. We're confused. And the truth is if you knew how scared that child it was, you wouldn't be angry. You'd be
and
sad.
and the trick is to give them in a safe space where they can vocalize that, right? Where they
Right.
can say what's
Hmm.
going on, and giving them that space. And the one thing, and I've said this in other podcasts, my daughter-in-law is so, well, my son-in-law and my daughter-in-law are so good with their kids in that they've always allowed their children to have voices. And so when they act up, it's not just being sent to their room. They actually sit down and have a conversation with them and help them walk through those emotions and feelings, and not deny them, but certainly work through them. So they learn at a tender age how to manage their own emotions, and try to understand them. Because I know for me as a child, because my abuse went as far back as I can remember. I don't remember not having the abuse, and just coming up with my managing ways, and my ways of having to deal with it. And one of the things that for me that I took clear into my adult life, and it's just only been the last 10 years that I don't do it, is always feeling like I'm walking on eggshells, because I had to, I'd walk in the door and I would assess the situation. I already knew that at such a young age to open up the front door, assess the situation, and, so that I can step into it. And carrying that all the way into my adult life, into everything I did, assessing every
Yeah.
situation and being on alert, just waiting for that thing to happen. And it's fear. It absolutely is fear. And it's not fun. And
No.
then I would misinterpret, of course, a lot of the things that I saw, right? Because I was looking at it through those eyes, and I would misinterpret
Exactly.
so much of what I saw.
Exactly. Wow.
I nailed it.
You've done a lot of work. You nailed it. You've done a lot of work to get to understanding that. That's incredible, Lisa.
Thank you.
I also just want to acknowledge my deep sadness for what you experienced as a child. No child deserves that. And
Mm-mm.
I'm glad that you're in this place now and able to help and give back, but I'm sure it's been a long journey, and
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge that for you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It has. It's been a long journey. And I just, the reason why I do this podcast is to helpfully shorten other people's pain, because there wasn't all this opportunities out there to heal like there is today. Um, and I just, what started mine is at 19, I knew there was something wrong. I knew I was abused, but I didn't understand the depth of how it affected me. But I knew I didn't like the way I felt. And so I went on a
Mm.
journey to get rid of those feelings. That's all I knew. That's all I knew, and I messed up for a long time. I lived in definitely survival mode. And that's probably something we can touch on too, because all those children are in survival mode. And,
Yeah.
and I've said before, you do things when you're in survival mode that you wouldn't do outside of survival mode. And there's a lot of cleanup, and once I realized that, and realized a lot of things like my triggers and stuff, it's really empowering to know that, oh, I'm not just this helpless being that has to just go along and be triggered all the time and be in survival mode, that I actually don't have to feel like that anymore. I can work through that and heal that and live a more full, fulfilling life.
Exactly. Yeah. And many people don't get to that, to that
I know.
place with that, because so much harm takes place. We know that people typically turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with those big feelings. What was it for you that didn't lead you down that path? Like what was it that put you more towards healing than self-destruction? I'm curious.
That's a great question. And I know the answer. My brother actually started doing drugs when he was like 12, and he's 7 years older than me. So I just remember and he didn't start with like pot. He started with the heavy duty. I remember him telling me like, the heavy drugs, even all the way up to heroin at one point. And I just remember seeing the way he acted, and it scared me. It really, really scared me. He was already unpredictable. And then when he would come home and he would be high or drunk, it was really, really frightening for me, and I would hide. And I knew he was what stoned or whatever it was. I knew that. And his bedroom was directly across from mine, and he would smoke pot, and he would open up his door, and all that would go in my room. And I would get a headache, and it stunk, and I would complain, and nobody would do anything about it. So I would just watch. And I remember one time he came home and he was so drunk, and he was probably 16, 17, and he was so drunk, and he got sick everywhere. And it was just such a turnoff for me. And I always thought, oh, he's so out of control, that I didn't want to lose control. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't drink as a teenager, but I got drunk, I think, twice. And I didn't like the feeling of not being in control. And then the drugs and I experimented with pot here and there, but anything else scared me because I felt like I wasn't in control. So it was by the grace of God, because that's a direction I definitely could go down. And I had other coping mechanisms. Like I had, I emotionally ate. And so I struggled with my weight. So there was that, but the drugs and the alcohol really scared me.
Yeah, that's an interesting example of, the different ways it can play out. That's why I wanted to ask you, because I'm always curious.
Yeah, when I did the workshop, it was interesting to hear how all the different women managed theirs. And there's a lot of different ways it can go. For me, I was totally in the victim mindset of, I didn't do anything wrong. It was everybody else's fault. And so for a long time, I lived my life like that and didn't own it. And I've seen others that, especially the ones that were sexually abused, that would go the other way, be very promiscuous, but they were the ones in control. They were the ones calling the shots. It's not that they just slept with anybody. There was a strategic plan involved, And so it's just interesting to see how, everybody's so different, and, and how they manage it. But yeah, that was my thing. It scared me. Thank goodness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can relate to that also, not wanting to lose control, because even I experimented in college with different things. But anything beyond alcohol felt like I was out of control, like pot, I really didn't try anything beyond that, but with marijuana, it just made me feel like out of control, scared the crap out of me. So I was like, I don't like this. I don't know if people do this. I mean, look, I know for some people, they swear by it, that it's helpful for them. So I'm not here to judge. I'm very open to what people think is best for them. I try to be accepting. So yeah, but I get that. I'm just saying I can relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I'm not doing that. It's too scary.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's journey is different, right? And that's one thing, one of the ideas I have with the podcast is for people to share how they've healed, because everybody's different. There's not one modality. There's not one way. Like for me, there wasn't. And it was, when I was at a place, I was open to this certain healing that helped me through certain things, and then I would move on to something else. And so I don't have one way that I healed, but the one thing that is common through, I think, for everybody's healing is the self-awareness, because the self-awareness is so empowering and really helps you catch things that otherwise would trigger you or set you off or whatever. And the self-awareness is what's really, really helped me. And it can be painful sometimes, but it's certainly empowering, and it really helps you heal much quicker.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's That's accurate. This self-awareness piece, even, for myself. So I didn't mention that my early childhood was also fragmented family-wise. My parents divorced when I was 2, and we lived far away from my dad, who we were very close with and had a good relationship with, but we were just, at long distances. And so my life was not your traditional, cookie cutter family.
Right.
It gave me a lot of challenges, and loss. There was loss there for sure, and
Yeah.
challenges. I think that I sometimes pass over that part and I go right to the adult, the adult me. But I don't think there was any one thing either that helped me through all that. It was, mostly support of loved ones, friendships, therapy. I'm still probably healing from a lot of things. I just went on a grief retreat for women who lost their moms in their 20s a couple of weeks ago. So I'm always on that healing path, and I feel like I kind of always will be. There's some things that happen that you just that stay with you, I guess.
Yeah, they kind of changed the direction that your life went. And so now you've got to kind of wrap your head around it.
Yeah, yeah. Or they come up, like they bubble up at, Christmas time can be really hard
Yeah.
for folks. And it brings up all the old stuff that you thought was healed, Or like having my daughter. I had no idea that was going to be like, it's not that it's triggering, it's like it's activating old stuff in me, it's activating my childhood stuff and my childhood pain when I see her at my age. When I see her at the age that I was when certain things happen in my life, it's like it like reminds your brain, and you're watching it now from the outside, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's how little I was, that's how innocent I was. And so that stirs up a lot of emotions and activates memories that you might not have thought about in a really long time. And so parenting, I think it's important for caregivers and parents to know that, being around, working with children, or having your own children can activate your own trauma. And being aware of that, like you said, the self-awareness piece, being aware of that is so important, so that
Yeah.
oh wait, this isn't my kid stuff, this is my stuff coming up right now.
Yeah. Because what the awareness does, it gives you that space between if you're being triggered or activated, and then that space between that and the response. And it gives you that minute to, like you say, to realize, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because that's what I do. If I feel something weird in me, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm feeling something. What is it? Am I off, or am I being triggered, or what is it? And because I spent so many years just reacting, and then having to go and clean up all those messes. And I don't like cleaning up messes. And so that's one of the things that I'm telling you was one of the most empowering things for me, is that self-awareness and realizing and being and paying attention to me, and realizing when I'm triggered, and not reacting the way I want to in the trigger, but reacting appropriately when I've had that space to stop and think and process. Cause I always say, wait, I got to process, cause I've heard a lot of people with my tongue. I used to joke that with my first husband, I could shred him with my tongue, and I wasn't proud of that, and that was just, of course, the hurt Lisa coming out. And it's interesting because one of the things that I'm doing lately is I've worked with the little Lisa and talking to her and working with her. I'm now working with teenage Lisa, because she's the one that really went through a lot. And she's the one that really didn't have support and really tried to have to manage all this, because all 3 of my caregivers, if you want to consider my brother a caregiver, weren't there. Like they were the abusers. So I was having to manage this on my own. And that's empowering as well. And so her and I have been having a lot of conversations lately, because like you said, it's a journey, the healing journey. And I'm realizing stuff now about my father that I didn't realize all these years. And I know why I did it. I was protecting him. I needed a hero in my life, and he was the closest thing. He wasn't my hero. I mean, that's the truth. He wasn't. I love him. You know, he's
Yeah.
not here anymore, but I mean, I love him, but he wasn't my hero. And I'm now having to, I guess, face the reality of what the truth was and come
Hmm.
along teenage Lisa and support her, because she's the one that got the brunt of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you are working with those different parts of yourself. That can be incredibly healing,
It
and
is.
highly
Yeah.
recommend it to anyone who's listening to, our, if you don't have the parents that could have given you that support to kind of go back in time mentally and give the love and support, that reparenting, of those younger parts of yourself that needed
Mm-hmm.
someone to be a hero. Now it sounds like you are being her hero.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. I didn't even think about that. I figured that out when you were starting to say that. That's so funny. And, and how I did it really, because I know some of the listeners may want to know, and this is the way I did it. I did it through my EMDR therapy, but I've also done it out. Yes. Oh, I'm telling you, it's wonderful. Have a session tomorrow. Um, and, what's been helpful is, at the time I was having little Lisa. She was trying to confront the abusers in this scenario in my mind. And she was not doing it. Her mouth was not opening, and I could feel her fear. And it took me a minute. And then I realized, oh, that's what it is. If she opens up her mouth and says something, she's going to get hurt. And so I realized, oh, I need to come alongside her. And so I did, like, literally in my head, I came alongside her and literally put my arm around her. And I, at first, started speaking on her behalf to them.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden she got real brave. And she started saying, she got real brave when she heard me, and, it was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then she's like, wait, let me take it from here, and she and she got it. It's so funny. I'm telling you, this is so
Love
true.
that. I love
And
it. I
she
get
got
it.
really brave. She got really brave. For the first time, someone was coming alongside her, validating her, supporting her, encouraging her, and protecting her, and giving her a voice. And so I got through that, and I'm like, yeah. And then this new thing came up, and I'm like, oh, teenage Lisa. Oh, and so now that one's a little tougher, because that one, she went through the worst of it. And for her, what I keep hearing her say, it's just not fair. It's just not fair. That's what I keep hearing her say. And so I'm coming alongside her, and yeah, you're right. I actually started writing a letter. It's a couple of weeks ago. I started writing it, and I know they say write, but I'm a fast typer and my mind can keep up with my fingers. And so I literally started writing her a letter and validating her, and just saying, yeah, when this thing happened and I would say it, I would say, yeah, it wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And so that's where I'm at with her.
I love that. That is incredible, incredible work that you're doing. And really, I just see so much potential for healing in that, in those
Mm-hmm.
scenarios. The EMDR, can't speak highly enough about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certified in EMDR therapy. I've been through it myself and had positive
Yes.
changes, heard from it. It's just, oh, it's so good. And the one thing that's great about it is it doesn't often take quite as long
Mm-mm.
as traditional talk therapy. It's just fascinating stuff. So anyone who's listening, EMDR therapy, and maybe
It's an acronym. What's the real name? I always forget.
it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Right. So what you're
So
doing basically is, they're having you look at, like with me, she has me look at a ball that goes back and forth as I'm reliving a memory at the
mhm.
moment, and what's coming up as I'm going through this. But it
Yep.
is much
And
faster.
right, it is. I mean, from the research, the evidence-based research on it is incredible for the progress that it's helping people with extreme traumatic experiences, even veterans.
Mm-hmm.
It's really effective for those big one-time. It can be really fast and effective for like a one-time trauma where it might be
Mm-hmm.
a car accident or some like one-time trauma. That's where they see the fastest
Yeah.
recovery and healing. But even for like yours, which would be like a complex trauma, complex PTSD, developmental trauma, there's all these different words for it, where it's over time repeated traumas from close relationships around you. EMDR is also very effective for that. It just might take a little longer.
Yeah.
Because there's so many layers of the onion to kind of unpeel.
For sure.
And the way it was explained to me, the easiest metaphor that was given to me when I was in training was that EMDR is like, imagine a desk. Imagine you're in someone's office, a messy office, and all the files, all the different filing, the folders, the files are like just strewn all over the desk.
I actually worked with an attorney who had an office like that.
Attorneys,
doctors,
doctors, people that don't have organizational skills. Just imagine a really messy desk with like files and folders just all over the place. That's kind of what happens with traumatic memories. They are scattered all kind of throughout your brain, and they're not filed away properly. And what the EMDR therapy helps your brain do is pick up each one of those files, which would be like a memory, and put it in its right spot in the past, and like file it away where it belongs. And so that they're not just all these messy memories kind of popping in at you all the time and interrupting your daily life. But now you've processed the memory. That's the reprocessing part of the EMDR. And now you're putting it in the correct filing spot in your brain. And it feels at peace with that, because now the memory is organized and put away, and you're done. You're like done with it, essentially. Like,
So when the memory comes up again, and it won't have that effect on you anymore. All of a sudden it's not this traumatic thing. It's like, for me, the best way to describe it is it's almost sometimes like I'm telling someone else a story. Like when I talk about the stories of my abuse now, for the most part, like certainly the emotions don't come up anymore. The feelings don't come up anymore. It's like I'm telling somebody else a story. It's really interesting. And one of the most profound things, and I don't know if this was EMDR, because I'm doing work outside of EMDR as well, right? Because I'm doing a lot of research while I'm doing these podcasts. I'm finding a lot of really great stuff. And so there's that too. And so I'm not sure what clicked that caused me to finally get this. But for years, of course, I knew in my head that the abuse wasn't my fault. Right. We could say everybody, oh, the abuse wasn't your fault. And yet I didn't feel it. Like, you still have that check in you. Like, I don't know. And I don't know why we have that, but I finally get it. Like, oh, it really wasn't my fault. And maybe part of what did that is, in the last couple of years, I've learned about my mom's past. So my mom, I lost her when I was 16. She died of cancer. And I didn't know a lot about her per se. I knew she didn't get along with her family. I knew she didn't get along with her mom. And I knew she was the oldest child. And I knew that there was, between her and her mom, it just wasn't good. I can remember literally one time them screaming at each other on the phone and hanging up. So I knew that there was some bad stuff there. But I didn't really know my grandma. So anyway, I was on Ancestry. And when I would do my dad on Ancestry, it went all the way back to the 1700s. Like, I have my family line all the way back to the 1700s. It's crazy. On my mom, it stopped at my grandma. It wouldn't go anymore, because it automatically, it goes out and it searches, and it'll let you know if it finds people, and nothing. Right. And I don't know who my grandfather was. And so long story short, I did a lot of research with a friend. She's really good. She found out a lot of stuff. And what we discovered was that my mom's mother had my mom outside of wedlock. As a matter of fact, I got her birth certificate, and on there you would put, it says legitimate, and they put no, and they double underlined it. So she was born with an identity. She is an illegitimate child. And that was she was born in 1927. My parents had me when they were older too. And so you could imagine back then, a woman having a child out of wedlock was just terrible. I don't know if my dad or if my mom knew her father, but on the birth certificate, it has 2 initials and his last name. He was 19. That's all we know. So I don't know if my mom knew that. Then I find out that she has 2 siblings that were adopted out. One that was born after her, and then my grandma's last child. I don't know if she knew that. Then what confused me for a long time is she had her last name. She had like 5 or 6 different last names. Every time I'd look her up, like there's all these different last names. Well, what we figured out is back then, when my grandma remarried several times, and although the man didn't adopt my mom, they changed the last name. So on the census records, they would put her new last name. And then we saw for a while she lived with her grandmother. So my point in all this is that my mom was abused. You could read between the lines in all that, I mean, right. And I don't know what the abuse was, but clearly she didn't, at a minimum, she didn't live in a stable home at a minimum. And then, and so anyway, I remember when I put this all together, I immediately had compassion for her that I never had before. Right. And had an understanding. And that was what kind of clicked. And I already knew my dad had abuse. I already knew that. He left home when he was 14 because of his dad. So I already knew that. So I'm putting this together like, okay, so that's why it carried down. Then the thing I got stuck on, and I still struggle with, is, okay, she didn't like how she was living. Why did she do that to me? Why didn't she stop it? Right. That's one that's tough. So, but that I really did understand in the depths of my depths that, okay, the abuse really wasn't my fault. I wasn't a mistake. Because that's what I thought about for years. Oh, I was a mistake. I was, and it was just, that is really empowering.
Oh yeah. I think that the intergenerational trauma and how understanding how that gets played out, not only behaviorally, like, just repeating the past and kind of repeating what has happened, and also not having the capacity to be a great parent because you didn't have a great parent to be there for you. But even genetically, epigenetically, there are changes taking place in our body that research now shows us that your DNA is altered from the trauma. So they've done, and I can send you some links on this, but they've done extensive research on Holocaust survivors and how trauma is passed down through Holocaust survivors, and also 9/11, and how the trauma has been passed down to the offspring of those who, were involved in the attack on 9/11. And they can see it now scientifically. They can see that there's evidence of changes in your biology.
It makes sense though. It makes sense because if you think about it, when you're under trauma, it is so incredibly stressful on your body. It's going to it makes sense. It's like, it's interesting that we're finding this out now, just like, storing the trauma in your body and learning to get that out of your body. It makes so much sense. I mean, it's a shame that we're just now kind of figuring that out. But it makes so much sense.
I think it's a game changer for those of us who blame ourselves, because I've spent my entire life blaming myself for my anxiety, like not being strong enough. What's wrong with me? Why can't I handle things? Why does this happen to me? I'm just weak. I've blamed myself so much for my anxiety disorder. And over the years, I've been digging. Once I've learned about intergenerational trauma, I started talking to people in my family just over the last year or two, and realizing how much trauma was in my family history was just so eye-opening, and like, oh, okay, this is where it's stemming from, because it wasn't just, it's not just me, there's a lineage here. And everything that has happened in that lineage has come down. Now, also strengths are passed down through that lineage. So I try to, I'm a big proponent of our strengths and focusing
Yeah.
on hope. And, we also were passed down incredible strengths and resiliencies and skills and all kinds of positive genetic things that came from our line of survivors, right? But the fact that we're all here
Mm-hmm.
means that we came from a line of survivors. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
think about that. Like things that you had to endure even, 200 years ago, 300 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. The fact that our line made that through that means that we're survivors.
Yes.
And so, that being said, there's also the flip side, right? Where there's negative things that are passed down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think realizing that took so much shame away from my own self. I just kept wanting to take all the responsibility for my anxiety and
Yeah.
realizing I don't have to take all the responsibility. There's so many things that led to it beyond my
Mm-hmm.
control.
And just
That
focus on
this
how you manage it, right? And now you're able to just focus on how to manage it and not let it get the better of you.
exactly.
And I think about, and I was talking to my daughter-in-law last night, and we were talking about this, that, like for my parents and even for me, there wasn't any kind of protection for children, right? So it was just common for kids to get spanked. And, I think abuse was so common then because it wasn't
Was
called what it was. Right.
right.
And kids were supposed to just keep their mouths shut and not, and so kids were not respected and treated well. And so like I wonder if my mother even realized that she was abused, because it was just, well, that's just how kids were treated. And I think I read somewhere that there weren't any laws for children to protect children until like the 80s and into the 90s. And so you can imagine it's
Mhm.
like when things were happening to me, if my parents called the police, they never protected me, but if they did, what were the police going to do?
Right. Right.
you know
Yeah.
so there's that, and that's what I joke about this, but I would love for this podcast to go out of business because everybody's healed from their childhood abuse, that there's no more childhood abuse. um
Yes.
wouldn't that
Yes.
be awesome, right?
It would
um
be. It would be. And there's just so many things that happen that can be traumatic for children, and it's avoidable, with
right,
education.
right.
90%, the most recent research shows that 90% of sexual abuse can be avoided with education.
Oh yes, oh yes. It's
Talking about it. And this new push that, we used to just put all the pressure on educating the child to know what's safe, what's not safe, what's safe touch, unsafe touch, what trust your instincts. And we kind of put all the responsibility on the
mm-hmm,
child to sort of protect themselves.
mm-hmm,
And now there's this new concept that's new to me anyway, is that no, we need to, as a community, we need to be talking about this.
mm-hmm,
You need to tell your friends and your neighbors that you talk about body safety with your
mm-hmm.
child, because if they know that and they happen to be an abuser, they're not coming into your circle,
That's a
because they're going
good
to know
point.
your child's educated. Yeah, they're going to know that you have your senses up and
Mm-hmm.
that your child is educated, and you're going to not be a target. So we
Yeah.
really need to be talking about how we are educating our children with our neighbors, with our friends, with our community members, teachers, and so that we're all having this conversation in order to take some of the responsibility off of the children.
Yeah, that's a lot. You
Because
know what? You're right. And that's a lot to put on a child. I mean, that's a lot to put on an
yeah,
adult, but a child that doesn't have the, understanding of what's going on, that's an awful lot. I mean, we need to give them a voice. We need to, empower them and give them a voice.
oh
But
yeah,
you're right. We can't put it all on them and, okay, here, do this now, go out there. We need to, it is our job to protect them and to manage them and have oversight on them. So yeah, that's a really good point. I like that.
yeah, I'm learning more about it. But last week I was brave, and I like texted like my ladies chat, my local people who, we're all like supporting in each other, and we're all moms, we're all doing things. And I was like, guys, I know this is a hard topic, but I need you guys to listen to this podcast episode on how to protect our children from abuse. And I was so nervous sending that text to them. Like, I didn't want them to think I was a weirdo or like just Debbie Downer or, you know, being extreme or whatever, scaring people. I was so nervous sending it, but I was like, I'm sending it. And
Mm-hmm.
I just said, you know, this is really important. And we need to be talking about this as community. And I got so many texts back, like, thank you so much for bringing this up. Like, thank you,
It's
thank
still
you. And everybody
taboo.
was, yeah, yeah, yes. It's hard to talk about.
We
Even,
can't have
you
it
know,
taboo now. There's too many
no.
creeps out there. There's too many creeps. You know, there's a, excuse me, on TikTok, what are they called? Colorado Ped Patrol, I think they're called.
Oh,
And
jeez.
but they're good guys. They're good guys. And what they do
Right,
is
right.
they set up these guys, these creeps that go after minors, you know, and
Mhm.
it's astounding to me, you know, and these are just everyday kind of guys. You would never, like, it's not, it's that old saying that, you know, you're not going to pick them out of a crowd. They look completely normal.
Mm-mm.
They're young, they're old. There's some that are in the law enforcement. I mean, there are some in schools, and they bust these guys. And, you know, and it shouldn't be taboo. We need to, these guys are out there doing this. These guys, men and women, it's not just men, obviously, but they are going after our children, and it's easier to get to them now. And that's why you're right. We don't need to just put it on the children, but we need to protect our children. We need to have eyes over them and pay attention to what's going on around us and talk about it. And shouldn't be taboo. You know,
Right,
because we shouldn't talk about it once an incident happens, right? It
right,
should be before.
exactly. Right. And like even in this trusted group of women, like the fact that I was so nervous, it was
Right.
eye-opening to me. It's like, I can't believe I'm this afraid to talk about this, you know, and put this out there. I was worried just like what people would think, like,
Somebody's going to
you know,
misinterpret it, and it's going to be,
yeah, or just, you know, or just like, oh, she's over the top. Like,
yeah,
we're just trying to have fun here, you know, I was afraid of being like Debbie Downer, you know, like
yeah,
nervous Nelly or
yeah.
whatever. And being judged that way. And I got the exact opposite reaction. And
Nice.
so I encourage anyone who's listening to this to find a podcast. I think it's called Save the Children or Save the Kids. I think it's called Save the
Mm.
Kids. And it just has so many good podcasts on not only protecting in-person abuse, but virtual abuse, you know, the online stuff, the sex,
Oh,
the game, you know, the gaming community that, you know, gets
mm-hmm.
into these headsets and starts, you know, grooming children on the game. So it has strategies for real life protecting your children and virtual online protection. And that was the podcast that I sent to my friends. And so I encourage anyone who's listening, if it's not that podcast, to find another one and
Yeah.
share at least one or two people this week to try and build a larger community of people that are protecting our children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah. So what would you like to leave our listeners with?
Oh man,
And it
we
doesn't
covered
have to
so
be
many.
just one thing. It can be,
Oh, we covered so much ground and so many good topics. I
I
really enjoyed
know.
this. I could honestly keep going for like another hour.
I
So,
know, right?
um, let's see. I'm trying to think like my best. I think the best piece of advice or the best guidance I was ever given was, you know, we put so much focus on fixing the child's behavior and not looking at our own stuff.
Ooh.
And
Mm.
so my challenge to you is if you want to help your children, start by looking inside and at your own trauma and your own pains and your own unhealed wounds and start healing them and start finding support and help for your own healing, and that will trickle down to your children.
Because your children are watching.
Yeah, they're
They learn
watching
from
and they're
us.
learning. Oh, too much.
Mm.
Too
Yeah, I
much
know.
sometimes.
I know. I've had to own something up recently with my son and my daughter-in-law, and I've shared it on a podcast where, um, yeah, yeah, he learned some stuff from me that I'm not real proud of.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We've all done it. And there are no perfect parents. Like that's the other thing. Dr. Becky, if you've ever heard of her, Dr.
Mm-mm.
Becky, she wrote the book Good Inside. And she talks
Mm.
about how we're all like, kids are good kids having a hard time. Like, you're a good
Aw.
kid, but you're having a hard time, and you're a good parent, but you're having a hard time. Like, you're not, don't give yourself these holistic labels of like, well, I'm just a failure as a parent, or
Yeah.
my kid is, we're all humans having a hard time
It,
sometimes.
and I
And
talk about that, and how I talk about it is separating who you are from what you do. So what you do
yes,
is not your value, right? And so separating, and it's the same thing here. The kids are good kids, they're just having a hard time. And
yeah,
so you need to help them. And yeah, and same thing with us parents, and that's what helps me. That is what has helped me work through some of my relationships is sometimes, we see someone that we love do something unusual and we get so upset with them. And then we stop and we realize, well, maybe that's not usual for them. Maybe they're going through something, and all of a sudden you don't take it personal and then you
yes,
can help them.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good point. And if anyone wants to stay in touch with me, do you want me to
Yes.
share
Yes,
like the
absolutely.
different
That was going to be my next question.
things? Oh, um, so you can find me on BethTyson.com, BethTyson.com. I'm also very present on LinkedIn and Facebook. I have a Facebook business page, Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting, and a private Facebook group called Emotimines. And that has about 6,000 members in it. And it's a private, safe, moderated group where I make sure and everybody is, kind, compassionate.
Hmm.
There's no arguing in it. There's no, like, it's very tightly uh, protected from any kind of riffraff and craziness. So I encourage parents or caregivers or therapists, counselors, whoever might be listening, to check out those places and those spaces to find more guidance, support, education on childhood trauma and how to help children heal.
Hmm. And you'll give me all those links and we will we'll make them available for everybody so they can reach out to you if they want to. And, and you also do speaking engagements though, right? So if you wanted to
Yes.
get, yeah. So why don't you talk about that real quick? Cause that's really
Yeah.
important.
Right. So as you mentioned when we first started, I was a therapist working
Mhm.
with children and families, but now I've kind of moved into well, not kind of, I have moved into an educational role where I'm speaking, teaching workshops, doing keynote speeches around the country, virtual trainings, pretty much working with any organization that serves children, um, that wants to be trauma informed, trauma responsive, and healing centered. So giving them the real skills and strategies that are practical, everyday type things that people can do to build that trust and safety and kind of, create community that is safe for children. So I love that work. That's my passion. That's what I love doing. I'm also a book author. So you'll see that on my website. If you go to BethTyson.com, there's a tab for books. And I'm about to publish my second children's book in the beginning
Nice.
of 2024. So keep an eye out for that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I also have a free newsletter that goes out every month with lots of resources, guidance, the latest research, all kinds of really, really good, helpful information on these topics. And that goes out once a month and it's free. And you can also subscribe on my website. So
Oh, if I haven't already, I will. Because I thought I did
yeah,
because I've been to your website.
you
Obviously, I've been to
probably
your
do.
website. But if not,
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a note of that because I would like to get that
I get a
newsletter
lot
as
of
well.
positive feedback on that. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy writing it, and then I enjoy the conversation that it starts
Mm-hmm.
up because I just, especially on LinkedIn, people are really creating good discussion around these
Ooh.
topics, and it's been exciting.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Oh, good. Well, thank you so
Yep.
much. This has been great. And, maybe I will
Thank
have
you.
you back and we can just continue this conversation. I mean,
Part two.
there's so much to this and I love that you help the children because there wasn't something there for me and there really wasn't stuff out there per se. And I didn't have a support system. So it's so wonderful that you're doing this stuff for the children and you're educating the parents. And, that's so empowering for them, right? When they, and how hopeful for them that they were dealing with this stuff, and they don't have to, that there is a way that they can heal and they can have a good connection with their child.
Yes, exactly. That's what it's
Well,
all about.
yeah.
Connection, positive interactions, and increasing joy in children and families.
And children are resilient. They are resilient, but we do need to protect them more, for sure. It's a
Oh
scary
yeah,
world out
definitely.
there.
Unfortunately, technology is making it worse. You used to just have to be worried about your physical safety, and now it's just the
Hmm.
access to technology has just compounded things so much. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was so great, and I'm happy to be a support to you in any way that I can moving
Yes,
forward, sharing this information, and yeah, I'd be happy to come back if you ever need me.
definitely. Well, thank you again.